In this episode, we are going to hear the stories of 6 firefighters and their strange encounters while on the job. I wanted to personally thank all the firefighters out there for risking their lives to help others. Your brave hearts and courage are very much appreciated. Now let's get into the stories. Hi Donovan. I had this encounter back in April of 2019 when I worked for the Kern County Fire Department. We had around 115 acres burned during one incident. We were out there for days on end with very little sleep. I was one of the first responders to the fire. I was on the ground with a few other firefighters, and we were walking around containing the fire. This was the second day in when I heard something rustling in the bushes to my left. When I looked over, I saw something move through the brush. My first thought was that it was another firefighter or someone else who shouldn't be there. So I yelled out, "Hey, you can't be here. This is a restricted area." The movement stopped and then it started again, but this time it moved towards me and into the clearing where we were all standing. As soon as it stepped into the clearing, all of us noticed what it was at once. It was huge. About 6 feet tall with wings that stretched out about 10 feet from its body. It had leathery skin and grayish-brown feathers covering its entire body except for its face. Its eyes glowed red like fire embers, and they seemed to look right through you as if it was reading your mind or seeing straight into your soul. I don't know how else to describe it. It then took 2 giant steps towards me like it was going to take off running, then flew over our heads and turned around and went into the fire. I didn't know what to think at that moment, so I just stood there in shock with my mouth wide open. The other firefighters and myself looked at each other as if we were all thinking the same thing. What in the hell was that? We then continued on with our job of containing the fire. Later on in the day, we got a call over our radio that one of the guys had been attacked by something while he was working in a different part of the forest. He said that he saw something swoop down from above him and grab his headgear off of his head before flying away. When he came back to us, he told us what had happened. It was the same creature that we saw. The fire must have destroyed its home and it didn't know what to do. What do you think about this, Donovan? I've seen a lot of weird things in my time, but nothing like this. I don't know if it was a good or bad thing that I saw this creature, but either way, it changed me for the better. It made me see life differently and realize how fragile we are as humans and how little time we have on this planet. We should cherish every moment that we have with our loved ones because you never know when it could be your last. Thank you for taking the time to read my encounter story. Hi Donovan, I just wanted to share a very weird encounter while I had on the job. I believe this was something supernatural that took place because there is no other explanation for it. This happened in the early 90s at a fire station in North Carolina. It was a very old fire station that had been built in the late 1920s. It was an all-volunteer department and we were always short-staffed, so everyone slept at the station when they could, which wasn't often. We would rotate sleeping shifts on the weekends. The room I slept in had 2 beds and curtains dividing it from the living area of the station, which also contained several couches and chairs and tables and other various items used by the firefighters while at work. We didn't have that much money. On this particular night, I was asleep on one of the beds, and I woke up for no reason and looked over at my buddy who was also asleep on his back with his mouth open. I then noticed there was something standing next to him looking down at him with its arms outstretched like it was going to grab him or something. It had long black hair, white skin, and black holes for eyes. It looked like it could have been a woman, but it didn't look human. It must have been about 7 feet tall because it appeared to be almost as tall as our ceiling, which was 8 feet high. I couldn't move or speak. So I laid there frozen, watching this thing stand there, looking down at my friend for what seemed like forever, but probably only lasted about 10 seconds or so before it disappeared into thin air. The rest of the guys were downstairs at the time. There were 4 of us that weekend, which was a lot. I told everyone about this when we were up for work that morning, but they all thought I was crazy because none of them saw anything. I told my friend, who was sleeping with his mouth open, that it was the freakiest thing that I've ever seen. I don't know if I was dreaming or what. He was a little freaked out about it at the time. Later that day, we ended up responding to a house fire that went south really quickly. My good friend, who was the one I had the vision about, died that day when the interior of the house collapsed on him. He was only 24 years old and had been with the department for about a year. I always wondered if this thing that I saw standing next to him that night was some sort of omen or something. I don't know what it was, but it definitely wasn't human. It looked like an evil woman who wanted to hurt my friend, which is why I think he died later that day at the fire. We were all very close and we all knew each other really well. So no one would have ever tried to harm another firefighter intentionally, especially not someone as good as a guy as my buddy was. This encounter has haunted me ever since because there is no explanation for it except supernatural in nature. My friend's death still haunts me too, even after all these years, because he didn't deserve to die like that at such a young age. Thanks for reading my long story and take care. Hey Donovan, I just wanted to tell you about a paranormal experience I had. I'm a firefighter in the city of Portland, Oregon. I work for the fire department as an EMT firefighter, so my schedule varies from day to day, but it's usually 12-hour shifts on 4 days on and 3 days off. The other night was one of those nights where a few of us were on the graveyard shift at our station house. We played cards until 1 a.m. when somebody suggested that we go into the basement. It's been known by firefighters for years as the haunted room. Apparently, there are ghosts down there. We decided this would be fun, so we went downstairs with flashlights and started messing around looking at all the old equipment. After a while, 2 of us walked over to what used to be an old boiler room door, which leads to the outside behind the building where they park the trucks during fires. It's kind of like a small garage door inside of a bigger garage door, so it opens up pretty wide once you get both doors open. As soon as we open both doors enough to walk through, I hear a noise that sounded like somebody was saying, "Hey." I looked at the other guy who had opened up the door and he said he didn't hear anything, so we both shrugged it off and walked outside. It was pretty dark, but there was a light at the back of the station house, which lit up part of the area behind us where we just came from. As soon as my eyes adjusted to the light, I noticed something standing inside the garage bay. It was tall, skinny, white, with no features whatsoever except for a mouth which appeared to be smiling. I don't know how else to describe it because it wasn't wearing any clothes or shoes. The only feature about this thing that stood out besides its height was its smile, which seemed very happy and welcoming, almost as if it wanted us to notice it. We ended up running around to the front of the station and left the garage doors open. We told everyone else what had happened. They all thought we were messing around with them until they saw how scared we were when we got back inside. We told them someone needs to go down and shut the garage bay doors. We all drew straws but decided to wait till morning to shut them. I ended up drawing the short straw and had to shut the doors the next morning. I didn't encounter that white tall figure again, but I did notice some black dust on the floor of the garage that I didn't see before. It looked like crushed charcoal. Anyways, none of us ever ventured into the boiler room again after that night. Hi Donovan, I'm a firefighter in the UK. I've been working for about 6 years now, and have seen some weird things during that time. The one thing that has always stuck with me, though, is an incident from when I was first on my job as a crew member. We were called to a house fire at 2 a.m. It was 3 of us and our firefighter operator, who we call the FDO. We arrived on scene within minutes of receiving the call, which is pretty standard for us due to our location in London. It's not uncommon for us to be there before the police even turn up. The address given by dispatch turned out to be an old terraced house with no front garden or driveway. So we parked right outside and ran inside through what used to be the front door, but had since collapsed into itself, leaving only half of it still standing upright. As soon as we entered, smoke hit us like a wall, making visibility almost zero. So we all switched on our torches attached to our helmets and started looking around trying to find the owner. In the next room, we found her and were able to take her outside to the medics, who started working on her right away. We asked her if there was anyone else in the home, and she said no. As we were putting out the fire on the second story, I see this little girl standing at the window. So I go back inside and try to rescue her. I get to the second story and she's not there. I check the entire room and there are no signs of her. When I came back down, I asked the lady whose home it was if she had a little girl. She said no, it was just her that lived there, and that room was an office that I saw her in. We finished putting out the fire and we were walking through the place and no signs of the girl were found. I swear I saw a little girl with blonde hair wearing a blue dress in that window. It bothered me for a few weeks, then I started searching online and put that address in a Google search. I came to find out that that little girl there was murdered 20 years prior in a horrific incident involving a break-in. Actually, the entire family, the husband, wife, and 6-year-old daughter, were all killed in a home invasion. It still freaks me out to this day. Donovan. I was working the night shift at Station 2 in Oklahoma. It was about 2 a.m. when I heard a noise outside that sounded like an animal howling, but it didn't sound right to me. So I went out on the porch and looked around with my flashlight, but couldn't see anything. After a few minutes, I went back inside and continued doing some paperwork until one of the other firefighters came into the station to get something from his locker. He asked if I heard any strange noises outside, because he thought he saw something moving around behind our building. After hearing this, we both decided to go outside again for another look-see with our flashlights. When we got out there this time, we could hear whatever it was moving around near where all of our vehicles were parked by the back door of the station house. We shined our lights in that direction and caught the sight of what appeared to be 2 glowing yellow eyes staring at us from under one of our trucks. The thing moved away from us, then toward a tree line across the street. When it reached those trees, it turned its head so its eyes were looking directly at us before disappearing into the trees. It looked to be about 6 or 7 feet tall. It had a large head and its arms were long. Its body was covered in a hair that looked like it was wet or matted down, but I don't know if this is what made the fur look darker than normal. I couldn't get a good look at its face because it was turned away from us. All I saw was its eyes when it looked at us. There's a few miles of woods across the street from our station, and I'm sure that it came from there. I don't know what it was, but whatever it was didn't want to be seen by us. We went back to where our cars were parked and noticed these large footprints and fur on the ground by my truck. It smelled horrible back there, like rotten eggs. I didn't see it again that night, but I did find a piece of hair on the bumper of my truck the next morning. It was about 6 inches long. The hair was very coarse and dark in color. I told one of the other firefighters about what we saw, and he said that his wife had seen something like this near their home a few weeks ago. He lives on the other side of the woods next to the station. I've heard other stories about strange things being seen in the woods around our station, but I never thought that something like this would happen here. Hi Donovan, I'm a firefighter in California. I have been for over 20 years now, and this is my first time telling anyone about what had happened to me on the job. It was back in 2016 when we had one of those big fires up near Sacramento. We were all working a long day trying to contain it as best as we could, but eventually it got out of control and we had to pull back until morning came around again. So as I'm driving home on this long stretch of road that's surrounded by nothing but forest, it was pitch black out and the only light you could see is from my headlights. So as I'm driving, all of a sudden something caught my eye in the distance. At first, I thought it was some sort of animal walking alongside the road. But when I got closer to whatever it was, I realized that what I saw wasn't an animal at all. What stood before me looked like some type of humanoid creature. It was walking along the side of the road. It had these long arms that hung down to its knees. The thing that creeped me out most, though, was how tall this thing was compared to my car. This thing had to be at least 6 feet tall. When I got close enough to see what it really was, all I could do is stare in shock. This creature had a very dog-like face with pointed ears and a long snout like you would find on an actual coyote or a wolf. Its body appeared very thin from where I stood. But what really freaked me out even more than anything else about this thing is that it walked upright just like humans do. And if that wasn't weird enough already, when this thing turned around to face me, its skin appeared grayish blue in color with patches of fur all over it. I ended up swerving over into the next lane and I hit the gas pedal as hard as I could. The faster I got away from this thing, the better. It was very strange indeed. Now mind you, I've heard all kinds of crazy stories about people seeing things like this out there in the woods, but never once have I come across anyone else who has ever experienced anything like what happened to me before. So if you want to know more about what happened to me up near Sacramento, then just let me know and we can chat some more. Thanks for your time, Donovan, and good luck with everything that you do. If you thought those stories were creepy and weird, well then check out this story right here. And don't forget to subscribe and tick that bell icon so you're notified when I release new videos. I try to release almost every single day and a few times a week on my true crime channel. The links are below.